The building stood at the end of the street, old, weathered and shrouded in perpetual shadow. Its facade, once a vibrant yellow, had faded to a sickly pale, stained with the grime of ages. Windows, like vacant eyes, stared out blankly, some boarded up, others reflecting the dying light with an unsettling gleam. This was apartment building number 404. No one dared to speak its number aloud, for it was a place whispered to be cursed. The iron gate, rusted and creaking, seemed to sigh as if warning away any visitor foolish enough to approach. Vines like skeletal fingers crawled across the brickwork, reaching towards the upper floors as if trying to escape some unseen horror within. The air hung heavy and silent, thick with the weight of unseen history and the unspoken dread that clung to the very walls. This was a place where shadows moved unseen, where whispers danced on the wind, and where time itself seemed to stand still. This was a place where fear had taken root, its tendrils reaching out to claim the unwary. This was no place for the living. This was the domain of apartment 404. The building had a history, a dark and troubled past whispered in hushed tones by those who lived in its shadow. Locals spoke of strange occurrences, unexplained noises, and fleeting glimpses of figures lurking in the windows. Some whispered of a family that had lived in apartment 404 decades ago, a family that had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only unanswered questions and an echoing silence. Others spoke of a fire, years later, that had ravaged the building, claiming the lives of several tenants. They said the fire had started in apartment 404, and that the screams of the victims could still be heard echoing through the empty hallways. The stories varied, but the underlying theme remained constant: tragedy, mystery, and an unshakable sense of dread that permeated every brick and mortar of the building. Over the years, tenants came and went, each drawn to the low rent and the promise of a fresh start. None stayed long, driven away by the strange noises, the unsettling feeling of being watched, and the nightmares that seemed to seep from the very walls. Apartment 404 remained vacant, a silent testament to the building's dark past, waiting for its next unsuspecting victims. The Nguyen family arrived on a dreary afternoon. The sky, heavy with unshed rain, mirrored the apprehension in their hearts. They were a young family full of hope and dreams, seeking a fresh start in the city. The father, Tuan, was a hard-working mechanic, his hands calloused but gentle. His wife, Lan, was a seamstress with eyes that sparkled with quiet strength. Their daughter, Mai, a bright and curious 8-year-old, clutched her teddy bear, her gaze flitting nervously around their new home. The low rent had been too good to pass up, and they had dismissed the rumours surrounding the building as mere superstition. They had each other, they reasoned, and that was all that mattered. As they stepped across the threshold of apartment 404, a cold draught seemed to greet them, sending a shiver down their spines. The air inside was stale and heavy, thick with the scent of dust and something else, something indefinable and unsettling. Lan busied herself unpacking, her cheerful humming a fragile attempt to dispel the oppressive atmosphere. Tuan, ever the pragmatist, set about fixing the leaky faucet in the kitchen, the rhythmic drip echoing through the silent apartment. Only Mai seemed truly at ease, her laughter echoing through the empty rooms as she explored her new surroundings, oblivious to the darkness that clung to the shadows. The first few days passed without incident. The family settled into a routine, their initial apprehension giving way to cautious optimism. But as the days turned into weeks, a subtle unease began to creep into their lives, like a persistent chill that seeped into their bones. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. A book knocked off a shelf, the sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway when no one else was home. A flickering light, a door that creaked open on its own. At first, they dismissed these occurrences as mere coincidence, the quirks of an old building, but as the incidents grew more frequent, more brazen, their unease blossomed into a full-blown fear. One evening, while Lan was preparing dinner, she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. She turned, heart pounding, but found nothing there. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end, and a primal fear, cold and sharp, shot through her. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. That night, as the family lay in bed, they heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible, coming from the corner of their room. It seemed to slither through the darkness, pronouncing their names, each syllable laced with malice. They huddled together, fear a tangible presence in the room, as the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were nothing more than whimpers, clinging to each other for comfort in the face of the unknown.